So because it's October, I've been in the mood to draw some spooky things, right? So I went on to YouTube the other day and I asked you guys a poll. I said, would you rather see me draw newer horror icons or older horror icons? Newer icon examples would be like Michael Myers, Jason, Scream, while the older ones would be more like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. To my surprise, the older icons won by a massive majority vote. Out of 20 people who voted, 18 of you guys said you wanted to see me do the older icons. So hi everyone, I'm Ward and welcome to my channel Wardrawsalot, and this week we're going to be drawing old horror icons. So I know I listed 3 different monsters for the older category, which was Dracula, Wolfman, and Frankenstein, but I'm going to be leaving out Frankenstein. Mainly for 2 reasons. Number 1, I kind of drew Frankenstein last year, but a more accurate description from the book, instead of the one that we know in the horror movies. I'll have that video linked up above in case you're interested to see how that version came out and what it was, the difference between the movie version versus the book version. And number 2, because of time constraints, so I didn't have enough time to actually fit Frankenstein in the video and draw him out, especially because doing the Wolfman took a lot more time than expected. Speaking of which, let's go a little bit more in-depth into the Wolfman and who he is. So folklore of werewolves or wolfmen have been around for a very long time. From ancient Greek literature and mythology to the Middle Ages to centuries prior like the 15th, 16th, 17th, all the way up until now, there are constantly stories and folklore being written or talked about of the Wolfman/werewolf. Stories of the werewolf aren't specific to a certain culture, however, it does hold a huge weight within European folklore, all of which described a monster-like creature that was half werewolf or half wolf, half man. It would carry the traits of both together, such as the hairy nature of the beast, along with the way they walk and how they're crouched over and they look monstrous. So what realistically it probably was somebody with a genetic condition back in like ye old whatever the fuck. And people just looked at them as a monster, or they didn't understand why a human being could look different from another. So sadly enough, people with different genetic traits got persecuted, which most likely than not happened. They even had like a witch trial for werewolves. You know, like the witch trials of Salem, they would hunt for witches and see who was blasphemous and, you know, going against, like, you know, the word of God. So they believed that werewolves were also a part of witchcraft, and that if anything could turn into a creature besides from the hand of God, then it was, you know, a devil or an evil thing or a demon, stuff, you know, along those sorts. So many people also got persecuted for, you know, being told that they are a werewolf, when in all fucking reality they were probably just these big hairy dudes. So that's sad to say that, you know, people died from the cause of just, you know, not knowing any science, but that's just the reality of it all, is people who were genetically different were treated different, and sometimes are still treated different till today, which is very sad. But that's the reality of things, especially for back then. They probably just, you know, chopped everything up to being evil, blasphemous, and deadly, and whatever the fuck. So sadly enough, that's what happened to those people. Now, transitioning from there, this Wolfman in particular is probably the most popular one. In fact, I think he was the first one to actually be made a big deal about. It was, I think, 1931? Hold on, let me check. My bad, it was 1941. So 1941, they came out with this movie called The Wolfman, and although there was like a lot of lore about werewolves and wolfmen before in the previous hundreds of years, this one was the one that got like popularized and most well known. So this is the movie that kind of changed the description of the Wolfman forever, because from then on they used this as an example of every Wolfman movie ever after that. So there's that. But also, this was, I believe, the first time they had done a movie like this with monsters that wasn't based on a novel. Like Frankenstein was based on a novel, and so was Dracula, but this one they kind of just had to go off of stories being told from years prior. So they kind of made up their own script to go along with everything, which is why it was used as the future mold of Wolfman stories. So now, coming into the drawing, you can see here that I have two versions of the Wolfman, right? His human form and his werewolf form. This is because, well, in order to transform into the werewolf, he has to be human, so I took advantage of that and then drew both versions. The story is this human, which I will also put a picture of the real actor. He's kind of handsome, right? I know I'm not the only one who thinks that. I'm guaranteeing others think it as well. But anyway, the story goes that Larry Talbot was basically told to come back home to Wales, where, you know, this castle resided, which was their family home. And his brother died, so there was no one else to kind of take over the castle. So he goes back home, which he was staying in the United States prior, by the way, and meets his father, and then they're like, wow, you know, home's just like home, all this stuff. And as he's there, he kind of looks through this big telescope that his dad just kind of had chilling in his house, and you know, he just so happens to see this lady at an antique shop through this telescope as she's putting on her earrings, and he's like, bet, I'm gonna go say hi to this girl. So he puts on his jacket, drives on over to the antique shop where the girl is, and tries to charm her up and be like, hey, like, basically like, hey, I saw you through the window putting on your earrings, you know, you want to go out? And she's like, no. And she says no persistently, and he's like, come on, why not, you know, give me a chance, blah blah blah, whatever. And in the middle of asking her about like going out and stuff, he notices that there's this cane in the store which has like a silver wolf's head, which is ironic, right? Because the only thing that can kill a werewolf or wolfman is silver. So the fact that he has that is kind of foreshadowing the fact that something's gonna happen. And at the end of her shift, which, by the way, he left and came back at the end of her shift and was like, hey, what about now? And she was like, you know what? Fine, but I'm bringing my friend. So she brought her friend with her. So the friend, the girl at the antique shop, and Larry all go out into like a nightly forest walk for some dumb reason. I would never, personally, if some dude did all that, I would be like, yo, you gotta get the hell out of my face. Or else I would smack his shit. But really, in the movie, they all go into like the forest, and the friend of the girl from the antique shop meets a Romani guy who tells her fortune / future and stuff like that. And they revealed that there was a star on the palm of the girl, which means in the movie that she's a target for the Wolfman. So she runs out because she's upset after hearing this palm reading, and then the Romani guy turns into basically a wolf / werewolf thing and attacks her. Larry Talbot hears this in the distance and then goes to try and save her, but you know, she ends up dying, and he tries to kill the werewolf. I think he does manage to, but not without getting bitten. And the story goes is that if you get like bit or scratched by a wolf / werewolf, then you will become one next. So that's exactly what happened to Larry Talbot, is that he became a werewolf and had no idea. So that there were attacks and like murders and stuff in this town, and they were all trying to connect the dots together, and they had no idea what was going on. And although he thought that maybe it could be him and that he's like not understanding why he's transforming, people were like, nah, you know, it's not you, it couldn't be you, there's no way you could turn into a wolf, that's like madness. And then they tried to chalk it up to like a psychological condition where they believed that like the mind over matter, where he thought that if he was just turning into one, that he would actually turn into one. It makes no fucking sense, but that's legitimately what they tried to chalk it up to be. And it wasn't until the end of the movie where they killed him and realized that it actually was him, because he de-transformed back after death, and then admitted that, okay, that there was some kind of phenomenon going on here. So yeah, I just saved you an hour of time. Or I ruined an hour of time if you were going to watch it. Sorry in advance, or you're welcome. I don't know. But I ended up drawing the human, and of course my style, and I kind of went off of the looks of the actor, who had darker hair, was kind of tall, darker eyes, lighter skin, anything else on there, and then the suit that they were wearing, especially because it was the 1940s, everybody and their mother was wearing suits, except, you know, the women actually weren't wearing suits, because why would they let women do anything? But the werewolf version was a little hard for me, especially because I don't draw creatures in the slightest, so he took a long while for me to try and understand anatomically. I made his hands bigger, his feet were kind of mixed together with a wolf's feet and then his, and he was covered in hair because the original werewolf or Wolfman in the movie was also covered in hair, and yak hair in specific, so he looked like this big mess constantly the entire time. So trying to translate that into my art was difficult, but I think I managed to do so as well. Although he looks like this meme right here, I still think he came out pretty alright. Now for the second character that I'm going to be doing, which is Dracula. I think Dracula truly is one of the most, if not the most popular horror icon probably of all time. He has been in like every kind of media that I could think of: video games, movies, TV shows, stories, whether it's like adult stories, children's stories, stuff like that. Dracula is kind of really out there with popular culture. Like, a lot of people know who he is. Usually if you ask somebody, they know that Dracula is this like old original vampire and, you know, has these powers and was practically the originator of vampires. So I think that truly Dracula left a huge stain on the entirety of horror media some way or another. The story was originally written by Bram Stoker, and it was published in 1897, so like forever ago. What is that? Basically like at least 100 something years ago by now, maybe like 120 years. And he actually based the character Count Dracula off of a real world leader slash prince known as Vlad the Impaler. Now, why is that important to this history of Dracula? It's because there was definitely a lot of takings from Vlad and what he did in order to create the character of Dracula. Vlad was a very vicious leader. He was bloodthirsty and torturous. He took thousands and thousands of people and tortured them. Doesn't matter if it was men, women, children. He apparently, there were rumors of him even killing animals and stuff like that too, and that he was very bloodthirsty. People still say to this day that apparently he would drink the blood of some of his victims, stuff like that, and it's a lot. It's a lot to go through. That's a very large history lesson that I don't have the degree to explain. So he's just know that he was very he was known as a pretty evil person, but at the same time brought order to where he was reigning from. So it's very wishy-washy. Maybe on the outside we see it as animalistic or whatever, but on the inside it's what he had to do in order to gain back his land. But basically the creator Bram Stoker read the writings on Vlad the Impaler and then based Dracula off of him as the result, which is why Dracula is kind of bloodthirsty and he works with, or quote-unquote through devil's magic, and on top of that he is just kind of something not of this human godly world, you know what I'm saying? So Dracula was looked at as this evil creature for a reason, and not only was it because it was brought from what Vlad the Impaler was doing, but because of the time, thinking of all this stuff that could be evil, and it was put into one character. So Dracula was not popular at first, but he became popular over time because of the way media takes things and then changes them throughout time periods and what are accepted. You know what I'm saying? Either way, I'm genuinely pretty surprised that this movie was even made, especially for 1931. I wouldn't think people could handle that back then, especially with, like I said, the way things were back then when it came to certain types of media versus now is a completely different story. We all look at like the 1931 Dracula and we're like, wow, this is kind of corny. And it kind of is, and it's a little, you know, of its time, but back then it must have been the absolutely most horrific thing anybody has ever seen on the screen. Just the fact that something can shapeshift into a bat and then drink your blood and then turn you into one of those evil creatures must have been absolutely terrifying for the general public. It's just like when The Exorcist released, when The Exorcist released, apparently people were having heart attacks in the theater. There were riots and like there were get-togethers to try and stop the movie from being played at theaters. There we go. So this way it wouldn't influence the community a certain way, or it's not promoting demonic activity and stuff like that. So again, everything is for its time. Now I think I watched like The Exorcist maybe like a few months back, and I was like, well, this is a pretty alright movie. It's not bad, especially for its time. But then, like I said, people were having heart attacks in the theater because they truly thought that there was an evil upon watching the movie. So it's crazy how everything really just dives the further you go into modern civilization. It's genuinely crazy. Now, for the movie of Dracula, the 1931 one, it's mostly based off of the book, so it's not that much of a difference from what I believe. But the story is basically that this businessman goes to visit Count Dracula at the castle, and everyone's kind of warning this businessman, like, hey, don't go. Apparently, he's like a vampire or something. And the businessman's like, nah, you guys are bugging. So he goes to the castle and then meets Count Dracula. And the whole point of Count Dracula in this book is that he's really charming and handsome, and that he can talk you into whatever and all that stuff. When in original lore, vampires are actually these like really ugly, disgusting ghoul-like creatures, and they will rob you dry of your blood. But for some reason, he made him really handsome in this story, to the point where Dracula, and you see like his 3 wives in the movie, like Dracula can literally seduce any woman, which is, why he has all those wives, because what he does is he goes out into the world and then basically turns these women into vampires, because he, goes into their rooms at night, bites them, and then turns them into whatever. He even turns the businessman into another vampire as well, and in turn, now that businessman had become his slave. So as a result, we have all that happening. The businessman, however, though, this was an interesting take that I saw in the movie, because I was like, oh, that's different. That the businessman would only feast upon like rats and bugs and stuff like that for their blood and nutrients, and his reasoning is that he's not a killer. So although he was like fallen slave to Count Dracula, he didn't agree with the ways even after being transformed, which is kind of interesting that happened. So I like that. I like that little character aspect. But I guess that's why Dracula was shown as an even more evil force, right? Because you have somebody who genuinely was like, I would never do that to a person, and then Dracula, who literally goes into girls' rooms at night, seduces them, drinks their blood, and all this stuff. So that's basically the entire gist of the movie, I'm not gonna lie. It gets to the point where Van Helsing, which is known as, the enemy of Dracula, basically hunts down for him and realizes that in order for Dracula to regain any strength or anything of the sort, he would have to be asleep in his coffin back at his house/castle, and then be killed from there. So Van Helsing ends up going into the castle where Dracula is at, opens up the coffin, and stabs him with a wooden spike right into his heart, and that is basically the end of Dracula. So the gist of the movie has kind of been normalized to us, because that's what we know Dracula for, but overall that was basically the entire plot. For the drawing, I really wanted to play up that Dracula was supposed to be this handsome looking guy, and I also based it off of his original look. So we have the all white shirt with the white vest, along with this giant black cape that would kind of wrap around him. He also has like slick back hair, and I think I'm gonna say brownish eyes or something around there, because they were fairly lighter in the movie. It's all in black and white. Both Wolfman and Dracula were in black and white, so trying to come up with original colors is like beyond me with what they were. So I just kind of went through with what I thought it would be, just based off of characteristics and what I could kind of see from me pausing the screen and looking at the characters. So I played up on the fact that he was handsome with the slick back hair, all that stuff, and I actually genuinely like how he came out. I don't really do slick back hair, but I also kind of modernized it and gave him like this mullet looking thing, because originally he just had short slick back hairs. But I thought that if I was to do it in my style, I really like some kind of at least shoulder length hair, and that's exactly what I gave him from there. I did keep his really pale skin, because apparently in the book he was so pale, like light could refract off of him. Like he was just like this really pale figure, and which is usually associated with vampires. So yeah, I did give him the fangs and a certain kind of makeup look because that's just me. I just like giving them makeup. And I didn't do it for the Wolfman because I just didn't think it suited his character, but for Dracula, I really thought that it would work very well with his face, especially because it was so pale. So I'm actually glad I went ahead and did that. I did, of course, keep the iconic red color that I feel like is definitely associated with Dracula. A lot of the time, I feel like in media or in some kind of stories or anything, for some reason, red is like his staple color, and I believe it's probably because, you know, he drinks blood, and blood is red, so that only makes sense to kind of throw that color in there. Regardless, both characters were really fun to draw and very different for what I usually do, especially because I mostly just draw buff dudes. And it's fun to kind of explore out of my comfort zone, and I'm kind of glad you guys picked the old horror icons because this was a new experience that I liked very much. So yeah, thanks for watching, and remember I love you. Bye!